Hello everyone and welcome to Dutch Greybeard. In this video I will rank all of my fantasy reads of the first quarter of 2024. These first 3 months of the year I read a lot more non-fantasy than I initially had planned. In total I read 28 books and 12 of them were out of the fantasy genre, which I love so much. I think that will change in the next quarter of this year. But you know, there's nothing as unpredictable as a Dutch greybeard. So this means that I have only 16 fantasy books to rank. This should be a nice short video. Here is the overview of all the books I'll be ranking. This chart shows you the order in which I read the books and how long each book kept me occupied. On a couple of these I did a separate video, which I'll link in the description down below. Right. Let's put these in the order of the rating I gave them, starting with the first book I read this year, which is The Wee Free Men by Terry Pratchett. Every time I talk about this book, there's a small smile appearing on my face. My first Discworld read, Guards, didn't really live up to its expectation, but this book, the first in the so-called Tiffany Aching sequence, really caught me by surprise. I spent 4 days with it and gave it 78 points out of 100. I then read The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle, which is a classic. Perhaps this is a book I should have read when I was younger, because somehow I wasn't really captured by the writing style or the story itself. It took me 11 days to read, and it scored a meager 64 points out of 100. Almost right after The Wee Free Men, I started reading the sequel, A Hatful of Sky, by Terry Pratchett, of course. This one kept me busy for about 12 days and I liked it, but not as much as its prequel. So 71 points out of 100. Almost on the same day as The Wee Free Men, I started reading Assassin's Quest, the final book in the Farseer trilogy by Hobb, which is the first trilogy in her huge Realm of the Elderlings series. From the very first book, I was an instant fan of Hobb's writing, and with each next book, my appreciation increased. I gave Assassin's Quest 93 points out of 100, which compares to a high 4.5, almost 5 stars. Then I took my time with The Gathering Storm by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson. It was my return to the Wheel of Time. This is book 12 in the series, and I put my Wheel of Time reading on pause for almost 2.5 months. I was so glad that I pulled myself through the slog of the previous 3 books, because this was an absolutely wonderful reading experience. During more than 2 weeks, I thoroughly enjoyed my return to this world and its characters, and I fell from the one amazing revelation into the next. With 95 points out of 100, I scored it just 1 point shy of a 5-star. Great read though. Alongside The Gathering Storm, I read the first novel in the series The Dragon Riders of Pern by McCaffrey. Dragonflight took me some time to get used to, especially the habit of the author to not explain anything. Because of this, I felt quite lost during the first half of the book. But the second half, a lot of things fell into place, and I could follow the story and enjoy the prose. 85 points out of 100. I then followed the advice of reading Discworld in its publication order, and I read The Colour of Magic by Terry Pratchett. Thanks to Nev of Nev's Book Channel, who said I'd best read or at least leaf through the first Pern book before reading this one, I enjoyed it. Still, with 62 points out of 100, it is my least favourite of the Discworld books so far. By the end of February, I finally finished listening to the audio version of Dunton Quest, the second book in the Duncton Chronicles by William Horwood. I'm a slow reader, but at listening to audio I am much slower. It took me about 3 months to listen to the whole thing. It is almost 24 hours of narration, but that did not put me off. On the contrary, this has been my only 5-star read of this first quarter, with 98 points out of 100. What can I say that I haven't already said in earlier videos about this author? Go read or listen to this series. It is so unfair that this series has been largely forgotten by now. After The Gathering Storm, I almost immediately started reading book 13 in the Wheel of Time, Towers of Midnight. This was just as good, with this little minor difference that the thrill of returning to this world after 2.5 months was missing. But this Sanderson fast pace of telling the story, where so much is happening at the same time, is just exhilarating. I rated it just 1 point below The Gathering Storm with 94 points out of 100. I then went on a Pern streak, where I read 5 books in this series back to back. I'm currently working on a video about my reading experience of these first 2 trilogies in The Dragon Riders of Pern by McCaffrey. There I will get into more detail about these books. Dragon Quest, number 2 in the first trilogy, took me 22 days, but that's mainly because I was also reading Towers of Midnight at the same time. It's a very good sequel, and even though I had some trouble with the first book, I rated this one slightly lower with 84 points out of 100. Following the reading order the author recommended, I then read the Harper Hall trilogy with Dragon Song, Dragon Singer and Dragon Drums. These are short books with a strong YA vibe to them. Dragon Song, which took me only 1 day to read, is my absolute favourite of the Pern books I've read so far. I gave it 91 points out of 100, which compares to 4.5 stars. The next, Dragon Singer, I read in 2 days. I liked this one a lot, but it felt as if all the magic of the story had been spent in Dragon Song. 79 points out of 100. And Dragon Drums, which I read in 3 days, was even a little bit less magical. But with 77 points out of 100, that's still a fairly decent 4 stars. Then I read the third book in the first trilogy, The White Dragon. Just as with the Harper Hall trilogy, this first trilogy gets less interesting with each book. It was still very good though, but I scored it only 82 points out of 100. Mid-March I had my first Jenny Words reading experience. I have her huge Wars of Light and Shadow series waiting for me for some time now, but because I've heard so much good things about her writing style, I want to dig into her work from the beginning. So my first read was her debut novel, Sorcerers Legacy. I'll be doing a separate reading experience on this book, in which I will explain that my low rating of 75 points out of 100 is by no means a degradation of Jenny Words' writing. I love her poetic prose and inventive use of language. It was the story that let me down a little bit. Absolutely entertaining and intriguing even, but pretty straightforward good versus evil. It's a short novel, so perhaps that explains why the author couldn't elaborate or give more twists to the story. Anyway, a great getting to know reading experience. My final fantasy read this first quarter was another Terry Pratchett. Even though I'm committed to read Discworld in publication order, as I mentioned, my wife had started reading the Tiffany Aching sequence in a Dutch translation. And because I didn't want to pass on this opportunity to read Wintersmith together with her, I did. Another great Terry Pratchett, my 5th already. It scored 76 points out of 100, just a little bit lower than The Wee Free Man. So there you have it. This is my ranking of all the fantasy books I read this first quarter of 2024. Do you agree with my ratings, or do you think that I missed the mark with any of these books? Please let me know your thoughts. Thank you very much for watching this video. Until we meet again at Dutch Greybeard.